High in the mountains, a village has endured relentless attacks from an S-rank Fenrir, forcing them to spend every last bit of their savings to hire an S-rank party for its defeat. The Flaming Dragon Fang members stand among the world's strongest adventurers, each boasting their own unique abilities. But Kurt, who ducks behind a wall, desperate to avoid injury. Yet, the moment the Fenrir appears, it targets Kurt first, sending him flying through the air. As he crashes down, the rest of the party prepares to engage in battle. Gulnova, the leader, instructs Bandana to hold the beast down, so she pulls out her wire and wraps it around the Fenrir. However, the creature's strength is overwhelming, and it hurls her into a wall. Fortunately, with a healer on their side, she's fully restored in seconds and quickly returns to the fight. She then anchors herself to a nearby tree, allowing Gulnova the perfect chance to target the Fenrir's head. He leaps into the air and ignites the beast with the flames of his magic blade. The villagers are overjoyed by Fenrir's defeat and, despite their poverty, throw a feast in honor of the party. However, Gulnova can't stand the shitty food and demands that Kurt cook him a proper meal instead. Bandana asks him for something special since today marks their final chance to enjoy Kurt's cooking. Kurt doesn't quite grasp what they're trying to say, so he turns to Gulnova for clarification, and Gulnova tells him that, starting today, he's being dismissed. Confused, Kurt asks if he did something wrong, but Gulnova explains that the issue isn't something Kurt did, but rather what he hasn't done, while Kurt takes care of the party's chores. Beyond that, he's ineffective in battle. And since a party can only consist of 4 members, if they want to grow stronger, they have to replace Kurt with a powerful mage, someone capable of holding their own in combat. Kurt pleads with them to let him stay in the party, but Gulnova kicks him in the stomach because he is sick of listening to Kurt's whining. They don't need him anymore, and that's final. The following day, Kurt sets off from the village alone, with no destination in mind and empty pockets. After some time, he reaches the city of Samala, now down to his last few coins, desperately in need of work. Spotting a work agency, he figures it's worth a try and steps inside, where the receptionist welcomes him. She asks whether he's there to hire help or seek employment himself. When Kurt explains he needs a job, she tells him there's an interview and aptitude test required before anything else. She requests some basic information: his name, age, and hometown, so he responds that he's Kurt Rockhands, 15 years old, and he is from Haste Village in the Sheen Mountains. Kershal is surprised, having never heard of a village in those mountains, but she moves on and inquires about his work experience. Kurt explains that he was part of Flaming Dragon Fang, though his role was limited to simple chores, and he was just suddenly fired. Kershal is taken aback when she learns that Kurt was once a member of an S-rank party, and even if his contributions were minimal, just having that party's name listed on his application will definitely boost his chances of landing a new job. Kurt is relieved to hear that. And now the only thing left is to complete the aptitude tests so Kershal can assess his strengths and weaknesses. In this world, aptitudes are divine gifts bestowed by God, and if Kurt's fortunate, he might uncover a hidden talent today. These aptitudes are ranked from G rank all the way up to Triple-A's rank, and the gap between each level is massive. Someone with a D rank sword skill would struggle just to swing a blade, while someone with an A rank sword skill could effortlessly cleave a rock in two. Kurt can't wait to discover if he has any hidden talent, but his excitement quickly fades when he sees that every combat skill on his sheet is ranked at the lowest possible level G rank. It's clear he'll never qualify for a combat job, crushing his hopes instantly. However, Kershal reassures him that he might still excel in a trade skill, like alchemy or blacksmithing. There's just one problem: the technician who administers those tests is away right now, so Kurt will need to return next week for his evaluation. Kurt tells her he won't last that long because he doesn't have enough money to hold out until then, so he really needs to find a job today. Kershal understands Kurt's situation, so she asks him to try lifting one of those sandbags over there. Kurt gives it a shot, and as he puts his hands on the bag, he gets a strange sensation, almost like the sand drained a bit of his mana. Anyway, he lifts the bag, and since he is strong enough to do that, Kershal thinks he should be able to handle construction work. Kershal explains that the Margraviated affiliate of Takon is actively looking for laborers to assist with rebuilding the city walls with her recommendation letter. Kurt should have no trouble securing a position there. Thankful for her assistance, Kurt doesn't waste any time and sets off right away to present himself to the Margraviate. Short later, the manager reads Kurt's letter asking to work there, but Kurt's body is not strong enough to handle construction work. Still, since he's short on workers, so he decides to give Kurt a shot. He tells him to mix up some cement and use it to repair the wall, and his pay will depend on how much he gets done. The manager says he'll be back later to check on his progress, warning Kurt that if he hasn't used at least half a barrel of cement in the next 3 hours, his pay is going to be low. Kurt feels the urge to ask a question, since the manager never brought up anything about infusing mana into the cement to make it stronger, but he chooses to keep quiet, assuming it's probably something everyone is expected to know. Even so, he's surprised that the daily quota is just half a barrel of cement. It feels far too simple. So, Kurt makes up his mind to use as much cement as possible before the manager comes back. When the manager returns, he's stunned to see that Kurt has already finished an entire section of the wall. Kurt apologizes, saying he could have done more, but he ran out of cement halfway through. The manager can hardly believe it. Kurt actually repaired over a third of the western wall. Curious, he asks how Kurt even reached the top, and Kurt casually explains that he just tossed the cement up there and used a stick to smooth it out. Under normal circumstances, the manager would accuse Kurt of lying. Such a claim seems impossible. Yet, since Kurt clearly made it happen, there's no denying he's telling the truth. Curious, the manager asks how long Kurt intends to stay, and when Kurt replies he only needs the job for a week, the manager feels relieved. He informs Kurt that he's already done plenty for one day and can head home now, since he doesn't have enough coins on hand to cover the full payment. He hands him a small pouch of money and promises to send him the rest through the guild. Kurt is stunned, as even the small pouch holds more money than he ever could have earned during his time with the hero party. Over the next few days, he keeps putting in steady work repairing the wall until, out of nowhere, the manager informs him that he's being let go. Confused, Kurt asks for the reason, and the manager explains that the wall repairs were intended to provide employment for people living in poverty. But Kurt is so efficient that if he continues working, there won't be any jobs left for the others. He doesn't hold any hard feelings toward Kurt or anything like that, but based on what he's witnessed, Kurt's ability is easily double S rank, maybe even triple S rank, so he believes Kurt would be much better off working somewhere else. He hands Kurt the remainder of his payment as compensation for the sudden dismissal and then walks away. However, Kurt completely misreads the situation and assumes the manager simply wanted to let him go because he was an awful worker. He heads back to the agency and meets with Kershel to tell her he got fired, and it's still going to take a few days before Kurt can have his trade attributes appraised. Just then, they hear a commotion over at the front desk, and it looks like a girl is trying to recruit someone. But the receptionist at the desk tells her that no one would agree to work under such terrible conditions with what she's offering. Even so, the girl keeps pressing the receptionist to find someone, and she's starting to draw attention with the commotion she's causing, prompting Kershel to step in and see what's going on. Her coworker explains that the girl is looking to hire a miner to dig through an unexplored mountain, but she refuses to provide any upfront payment, insisting she'll only pay if the excavation ends up being successful. Kershel agrees no one would ever agree to those terms, so she tries to convince the girl to hire investors to develop the mine. But the girl says she can't do that because if she doesn't pay the taxes by the end of the week, they'll empower count her mine. Just then Kurt walks up and says he is willing to take the job after all. Back in his village, he used to help with the mine excavation, so he has a decent amount of experience. Kershel questions whether Kurt truly wants to accept this job, warning him the girl's proposed contract might leave him completely unpaid. Before Kurt can answer, the girl interrupts, admitting she'd actually hoped to recruit a muscular dwarf rather than a scrawny boy. She'd feel guilty assigning such work to Kurt, but any dwarf would demand at least 10 silver upfront, so since the girl doesn't have that much money, she reluctantly agrees to hire Kurt instead. As Kurt and the girl leave, Kershel feels bad for letting him take that job because it probably isn't worth the time. Honestly, she thinks Kurt would be better off working in a brothel. While she's daydreaming about Kurt, her coworker gets her attention and tells her that a bank transfer just came through. Apparently, it's the remaining money the manager promised to send to compensate for all the work Kurt Kurt did on the wall, and Kershaw was expecting a couple silver coins, but it's actually a check for 200 gold, and that's a lot of money. The revelation that Kurt earned so much leaves her so stunned, she trips over the sandbags on the floor. Her friend quickly warns her to be cautious. These aren't ordinary sandbags, but specialized tools for measuring mana capacity. They're designed to get heavier when touched by someone with substantial mana reserves. Most ordinary people don't affect them at all, which is why Kershaw can lift one without trouble. But then she recalls how Kurt had struggled painfully to move the same bag just days earlier, making her question whether he's really as average as he seems. Meanwhile, Kurt and Ulysses are walking into the forest to get to her campsite. But when they get there, Kurt is a little concerned because there's only one tent. Ulysses says the tent is big enough for the two of them to sleep together, but Kurt says he'd never be able to go to sleep if he's lying next to a cute girl like her. After hearing Kurt call her cute, Ulysses gets upset because she thinks he's just trying to flatter her. But Kurt says he really does think that she's as cute. Ulysses realizes that Kurt was being completely sincere, so she hands him a potato for dinner. It's nothing fancy, just a plain boiled potato, but it's been so long since anyone has prepared a meal for him that he truly values the gesture. He's also thankful that Ulysses is sitting down to eat with him, especially since his former companions from the hero party never allowed him to share the same room with them during meals. Later that night, Kurt and Ulysses go to bed, but Kurt is having a hard time sleeping because Ulysses went to bed in her underwear. He will never be able to go to sleep around her, so he decides to leave the tent for the night and sleep outside. Once Kurt leaves the tent, Ulysses opens her eyes because she was just pretending to fall asleep. She intentionally went to bed in her underwear to see if Kurt was the kind of person to assault her in her sleep, but now she knows he's a good guy. The following day, Ulysses steps out of the tent and spots Kurt sleeping by a tree, which makes her feel a bit guilty for making him sleep outside. But then she notices that her jacket has been fixed. Kurt wakes up shortly after, so she asks if he's the one who fixed it, and he confirms that he is. She's genuinely impressed by his sewing skills and starts to question whether he's actually going to be any good at mining. But at this point, it's too late to find a replacement, so they might as well get started. Kurt asks Ulysses if she has decided on a location to begin mining yet, but she was just going to dig in random locations and pray to find some valuable ores. Kurt tells her she'll never find anything if she searches like that, and he happens to know a much more efficient way. He takes Ulysses to a section of the mountain, and after looking around for a bit, he finds a rock full of gemstones. Ulysses is stunned that he discovered it with such ease, but within minutes, Kurt has managed to find every single gemstone in this part of the mountain. She can scarcely believe it. If she sells all these gems, her debt could finally be paid off. However, Kurt informs her that she can't sell them. Ulysses understands his point, since Kurt was the one who located all of them, meaning he's entitled to the profits. But that wasn't his intention. He simply meant that the gems would be worth far more if he first transformed them into magic crystals. Kurt is right about that. But Ulysses says there are only 10 mages in the entire kingdom who are skilled enough to turn gems into magic crystals. But while she was saying all that, Kurt just finished turning a gem into a magic crystal. Ulysses is too stunned to speak because not only did Kurt create a magic crystal, but he did it instantly when even the most experienced mages spend at least an hour to make a single magic crystal. Once Kurt finishes converting all the gems into crystals, he agrees to let Ulysses take them to sell, so she sets off while he remains on the mountain to take care of a few things he still wants to complete. Ulysses makes her way to the city's customs agency and informs them that she plans to sell some magic crystals in the royal capital. However, since magic crystals are extremely valuable, the knight on duty asks where she obtained them. Not wanting to reveal any details, she simply flashes her royal family emblem, putting an end to his questions. This is somewhat of a bluff, considering she stopped working for the royal family some time ago, and they simply forgot to revoke her emblem, but it works nonetheless. The customs agent lets her use the teleportation circle to travel to the capital. Once she arrives, she makes her way to the shop of an old friend and tells Mimiko that she's got some magic gems she wants to sell. Mimiko takes a glance at the crystals, and at first, they don't appear to be anything particularly valuable, but after examining them more carefully, she realizes they contain 10 times the usual amount of mana, making each crystal worth 10 gold. Ulysses is left speechless, especially since Kurt handed her 50 of them. Without much fuss, Mimiko Mimiko casually hands her a pouch containing 500 gold coins. However, before Ulysses departs, Mimiko has two important conditions. First, she insists that Ulysses must agree to exclusively sell such crystals at her shop. After all, allowing such potent crystals to spread freely without oversight could lead to catastrophe. Second, she demands to know the identity of the person who crafted these crystals. Ulysses accepts the first condition, though she explains that she can't reveal the name of the crystal's creator to Mimiko not without getting his permission first. Since Mimiko serves as a court mage for the royal family, she attempts to leverage her authority, demanding that Ulysses hand over the mysterious mage's details. But Ulysses no longer works under the crown, meaning she has no duty to follow Mimiko's orders. Mimiko quickly understands that Ulysses won't reveal Kurt's details, so she settles for requesting one thing: that Ulysses ensures he doesn't leave for another country. Additionally, she has an offer. If Kurt agrees to work for the royal family, Mimiko is ready to bestow upon him the rank of count, along with unrestricted privileges to use the royal research laboratory and enjoy all its advantages. Ulysses then departs from Mimiko's shop, and the following morning she makes her way back to the mountain to reunite with Kurt. However, she's stunned to discover that Kurt managed to build an entire house in just a single night. Putting that aside, Ulysses mentions that one of her friends is interested in hiring Kurt as a royal mage. If he agrees to take the role, he would be granted noble status, ensuring a generous salary along with various perks. Despite this, Kurt struggles to accept that such a prestigious opportunity is being presented to him. Though Ulysses insists the offer is completely real, she presses him about his decision, but Kurt responds that he intends to refuse. Ulysses is shocked by his response, as most people would eagerly seize the chance to become a royal mage. However, Kurt feels unworthy of a position that elevates him above others, and he still dreams of returning to his old role as the Flaming Dragon's chore boy, even if that means begging them to take him back. Speaking of the Flaming Dragon, they're currently getting completely wrecked by a tree monster. For some reason, Golnova can't use his fire magic, so he turns to Marlefis, begging her to heal him. She's been attempting to do so for a while now, but her healing magic just isn't functioning like it normally does. Frustrated, Golnova tells the new recruit to cast some fire magic and deal with the tree, but the new guy doesn't even know how to use fire magic. Plus, that was always Golnova's job in the first place. Without Kurt around to keep things running smoothly, the party's teamwork has completely fallen apart, and Bandana is the only one who seems to notice just how badly they're falling to pieces. Returning to Kurt, his current task is still assisting Ulysses with gem mining, and he mentions that he found a good gem yesterday, so he'll be able to get a lot more for her. Ulysses appreciates his eagerness, but she's a bit worried that Kurt might be exhausted after all the work he did the day before. Still, he tells her not to be concerned since he managed to get 6 hours of sleep last night. Ulysses is taken aback by that and starts doing some quick mental calculations, trying to figure out how Kurt was able to build an entire house and still get 6 hours of sleep. But Kurt misreads her reaction, thinking she's upset that he slept too long. So he apologizes and promises to work harder to compensate for his laziness. At some point, Ulysses really needs to explain Kurt's incredible strength to him, but she has no clue how to even bring it up. So instead, the two of them just head out to continue mining. Kurt leads Ulysses to the area he discovered, and while it appears to be just a normal part of the forest, he tells her she should be able to uncover some quality gems here. He does warn her, though, not to dig beyond 50 meters. As he begins to walk off, Ulysses asks where he's going, and Kurt tells her that he's headed to a different mining spot, and that they'll meet up again later. By evening time, after a full day of digging, Ulysses finally strikes gold, or rather, a massive topaz gem. She had already deposited all the gold coins earned from the magic gems into Kurt's account since he was the one who originally found them. But because she discovered this one on her own, she plans to use the profits to pay off her taxes. She figures she could probably persuade Kurt to turn the gem into a magic one to earn even more money, but ultimately decides against it. She doesn't want to exploit Kurt's generosity by pushing him to do more. Thinking of Kurt, Ulysses decides to check on his progress, and given what she's seen from him before, she expected him to overdo it, but even she wasn't prepared for him to have constructed an entire tunnel system in just 8 hours. Eventually, Kurt emerges and tells her that he only managed to find a small amount of the specific gem he was searching for. The rest of gems he dug up was just a pile of worthless rocks, which he plans to throw away once he's finished. Curious, Ulysses takes a closer look into the cart stones, and something about them catches her eye. They look far too polished to be mere rubble. She asks Kurt what they are. Kurt casually explains that those are actually mithril ores, but in his village, mithril was so abundant in the mines that people usually just tossed it aside whenever they stumbled upon it. Ulysses is utterly speechless, torn between disbelief and burning curiosity about what kind of place Kurt even grew up in. Struggling to process this, she asks him what gem he was searching for if he treats mithril like common garbage. Kurt pulls out a small rock and reveals he's been hunting for orichalcum, though he only managed to gather enough to fill a tiny box. Orichalcum, often referred to as the metal of the gods, is so valuable that even a single gram is worth millions, and yet Kurt casually managed to collect an entire box of it. Ulysses had no idea orichalcum could even be found in places like this, but Kurt tells her you can mine it anywhere. You just need to dig 7 kilometers into the ground to get to it. Ulysses decides that's enough mining for today, and since the topaz she found will cover her taxes, her contract with Kurt is over. That means Kurt has to start looking for another job, because no one has told him about the mountain of gold in his bank account yet. As Kurt makes his way to the agency, he bumps into Bandana, and while he's happy to see her, he immediately asks what she's doing there. Bandana lets him know that she's no longer with the Flaming Dragon, though there's a bit more to the story than just that. Following their disastrous mission, Golnova decided to visit a 5-star restaurant in hopes of enjoying a decent meal, but after being used to Kurt's cooking, everything on the menu tasted like garbage to him. Furious, Golnova ends up trashing the place and storms out without bothering to pay. As he walks into an alleyway, he meets Bandana, and she tells him he went too far by destroying that restaurant. However, all Golnova cares about is getting good food, so he orders Bandana to go find Kurt and force him to come back, even if it means breaking his bones to do it. Golnova is clearly losing his mind here, so Bandana doesn't argue with him about it. She just snatched Golnova's teleportation crystal and runs out of the alley. As she departs, she notices the city guards moving in on Golnova's location, and without his teleportation crystal, there's no doubt he'll be arrested for what happened at the restaurant. On top of that, Marlefus was summoned away by the church, meaning the Flaming Dragon party is officially finished. While she omits most of the details about Golnova losing control, Kurt is upset to learn that Flaming Dragon has disbanded after all. This means he can no longer rejoin, but Bandana can't grasp why he'd even want to return in the first place. Kurt clarifies that he owes a lot to Golnova, and since he's still completely unaware of what a jerk Golnova actually was, he's genuinely upset that he won't get the chance to work with him again. Bandana, however, never really cared about Golnova. To her, he was just part of the cover story, so she could keep watching Kurt. Anyway, since Kurt was already heading to the agency, Bandana figures it's safe to assume he's job hunting. And if that's true, then she's got just the thing for him. One of her friends has been needing an extra pair of hands around her workshop lately, and it should be a pretty solid job, especially since this friend happens to be an 8-layer master. There are only 15 8-layer masters in the world, and they are all incredibly important, so their influence is on par with that of a viscount. Bandana asks Kurt if he wants to accept the job, and he says he'd love to, so she hands him a map and sends him on his way. Eventually, Kurt arrives at the 8-layer master's workshop. Though he's slightly confused, the place looks just like an ordinary house to him. He knocks, and a small elf girl answers the door. At first, Kurt is taken aback, since he never expected the 8-layer master to be such a young girl, but Michelle quickly clarifies that she's actually the master's assistant. Hearing that, Kurt explains he's there about the job, and Michelle lights up at the news she could really use all the help available. She brings Kurt into the kitchen, and the moment he steps inside, he's hit by the awful stench lingering in the air. Michelle apologizes for the mess, explaining that the master has been keeping her so busy that she hasn't had any time to clean up properly. Just then, the master calls out for Michelle, so she hurries off, asking Kurt to lend a hand tidying up the kitchen. Kurt feels a bit let down, since he was hoping to assist the 8-year master directly, but cleaning up is an easy enough task for him, so he rolls up his sleeves and gets to it. 30 minutes later, Kurt has cleaned the entire kitchen and Michelle didn't really tell him what he's supposed to do next, so he starts wandering the halls looking for her. He finds a door in one of the corridors, so he knocks on it and a girl inside tells him to come in. However, when Kurt enters, he sees the girl practically naked. He gets flustered and apologizes for the intrusion, but she doesn't seem bothered by Kurt seeing her like this. Kurt mentions that he's searching for Michelle, and the girl responds by saying that Michelle is downstairs in the basement. As Kurt is about to head off to find her, he catches sight of a dark mark on the girl's abdomen. Recognizing it as a curse, he asks if he can examine it more closely. The girl agrees, and Kurt steps up to her and begins inspecting the cursed area with his hands. Curses like this typically damage the internal organs near the affected region, which would make eating extremely difficult. However, it turns out her stomach is still unharmed, so Kurt offers to prepare some food for her. Meanwhile, Ulysses meets with Mimiko to talk about the mithril and orichalcum that Kurt discovered. This time, Kurt didn't even convert them into magic crystals, yet their worth still exceeds 50,000 gold coins, which is beginning to worry Ulysses. She questions Mimiko about what might occur if others learn of Kurt's ability in the most favorable outcome. He could be abducted and enslaved. In the worst case situation, he might be killed for posing too great a danger. Mimiko questions Ulysses about what she intends to do with Kurt, and up until now, Ulysses has considered arranging for him to become an 8-year master. By doing so, he would gain enough influence that nobody could easily exploit him. After that, she intends to serve as his personal bodyguard. However, convincing Kurt to go along with all of this won't be easy. He's oblivious to just how talented he really is, and even worse, he constantly underestimates his own worth. Because of that, Ulysses knows she has to act before Kurt ends up in serious trouble. Meanwhile, Kurt has just wrapped up making some porridge for the girl he encountered earlier when, out of nowhere, Michelle and the 8-year master, Ophelia, emerge from the basement. They're both taken aback to see that the kitchen is no longer a disaster, and are even more surprised that Kurt managed to clean it up so quickly. Spotting the porridge, Ophelia comments on it, prompting Kurt to explain that the girl he found in one of the rooms mentioned she was hungry. Ophelia seems a bit concerned that Kurt met that girl, so she makes him promise not to tell anyone about her. Kurt promises, so Ophelia tells him he can go home for the day and hands him 3 silver coins. Kurt is surprised that she's paying him so much for just cleaning the kitchen, but she says he deserves it for working so hard and asks him to come back tomorrow. Shortly after, Ophelia makes her way to the girl's room, carrying the porridge Kurt prepared for her, and she reminds Lies that she isn't supposed to be seen by others. That said, Kurt doesn't appear to be dangerous, so Ophelia doubts there's any risk of him revealing the secret. Noticing that Lies still hasn't touched her food, Ophelia tells her to hold on while she checks the porridge for poison. Still, Lies insists it's unnecessary. She only talked to Kurt briefly, but something in her gut tells her he's trustworthy, and anyway, poisoning her now would be pointless. The curse has already taken too deep a hold. Her whole life has been spent doubting everyone around her, so this time, she just wants to believe in someone without hesitation. Ophelia relents and allows her to eat the porridge, but the moment Lies takes her first spoonful, she suddenly breaks into a heavy sweat and collapses onto the floor. Convinced that Kurt must have poisoned the meal despite everything, Ophelia immediately prepares to search for an antidote until Lies abruptly sits back up, declaring she's perfectly fine. Not just fine, in fact, but better than she's ever felt before, because the curse has been lifted. Ophelia struggles to comprehend what just happened. Breaking a curse of that magnitude shouldn't be that simple. Yet there's no denying it was broken by a mere meal Kurt prepared. Meanwhile, at that very instant, the shadowy organization responsible for placing the curse on Lies convenes in urgent session. They had intended to eliminate Lies from afar using the curse, but now that plan has failed, and they realize they'll need to resort to more extreme methods. That night, Ophelia and Lies make their way to Mimiko's shop with pressing matters to address. When Lies removes her hood, Mimiko and Ulysses immediately identify her as the kingdom's 3rd princess. Ophelia goes on to explain that a powerful curse had been cast on Lies as part of an assassination attempt. They still don't know exactly who's responsible. As the only child born to the king and princess Francois of the Gurumaku Empire, Empire, Liza's very existence serves as a living peace treaty between the nations. Clearly, someone wants to ignite a war. Mimiko is relieved to see that Liz is safe, though she's shocked the princess could dispel such a lethal curse alone. But Liz quickly clarifies she didn't break it herself. The curse was actually lifted by a man called Kurt. The instant Mimiko and Ulysses hear his name, they immediately panic. Ulysses still struggles to wrap her head around the fact that a simple bowl of porridge managed to break the curse that tormented Liz for so many years. She's well aware by now that Kurt is capable of some wild feats, but she only left him unsupervised for half a day, and somehow he ended up rescuing the princess. While they do plan to reward Kurt for his assistance eventually, Mimiko believes their top priority should be finding whoever cast the curse in the first place. After all, Liz's room is normally protected by anti-curse enchantments, meaning someone must have interfered with them before she was cursed. Only 3 individuals in the kingdom had access to Liz's room at the time: Sinova Ristkatz, the first general of the Royal Expedition Force, Tristan Maynolf, the bishop of the Poland Church, and Isadora, the kingdom's 3rd queen, but they can't afford to throw around baseless accusations. They'll need solid proof before taking any action. Ophelia proposes that they set up a trap to draw the culprit out, and she already has the ideal plan in mind. Since Liz just recently turned 15, royal tradition dictates that she must leave home and undergo a year of training. The ones responsible for the assassination attempt will no doubt make another move. So Ophelia intends to fabricate an Atelier master and claim that Liz has been sent there for her training. The assassins will likely attempt to gather intel on the Atelier master in order to prepare their next strike, and when they do, they'll walk right into Ophelia's trap. However, they'll need someone with impressive credentials to play the role of the fake Atelier master, and Ulysses already knows exactly who that should be. She presents one of the magic crystals that Kurt crafted to Ophelia, and the moment Ophelia lays eyes on it, she's completely certain it's the finest quality crystal she's ever encountered. When it comes to Kurt, the following day he returned to Ophelia's house for work, only to find a note on her door saying she wasn't there. Just then, he bumps into Michelle, so he asks her what's happening. Michelle tells him that Ophelia left abruptly the day before. She and Liz went out together and still haven't come back. Sadly, this means Kurt has no work today, so he walks away dejected and makes his way to the guild to grab a meal. As he eats, he catches the conversation of a group sitting at the next table. They're in a panic because their porter fell ill, and without him, they won't be able to manage their upcoming mission. There's no time to put up notices for a replacement either, so it seems they'll have no choice but to call off the mission entirely. Kurt gives it some thought and feels sure he's capable of taking on the porter's role, so he walks over to their table and introduces himself. He explains that he happened to hear their discussion, and while he's not good at fighting, he's sure he can still be a valuable asset to their team by working as a porter. Sina scoffs at the thought of Kurt joining them as a porter, insisting that a skinny kid like him could never manage such demanding work. Cans gives her a smack on the head and apologizes to Kurt for her rude attitude, but even he doubts that Kurt is cut out for the job. Being a porter is physically exhausting, especially considering their team is targeting golems that weigh more than 200 kilos. However, Kurt confidently claims that carrying 200 kilos is no problem for him. To prove his point, he lifts both Danzo and Cans right then and there, making it look effortless, even though Cans is wearing over 150 kilos of armor. With that display, Kurt clearly shows he's more than capable, so the party agrees to bring him on as their porter. As they travel to the mission site, they all take the time to properly introduce themselves to Kurt. Cans is the team's heavy warrior, but despite having a sword, he mostly prefers to fight with his fists. Danzo, on the other hand, is a samurai, and Sina serves as the party's ranger. There's actually one more member, but he's currently sick with a nasty cold. That's exactly why they needed to bring Kurt on as a temporary replacement. They express their gratitude for his help, to which Kurt responds by thanking them for giving a worthless nobody like himself this opportunity. The group is confused, since someone truly incompetent definitely couldn't lift 350 kilograms as effortlessly as stretching before exercise. But they simply assume Kurt must be joking. As the team keeps walking, they hear a scream and Kurt is getting attacked. The others instantly turn back to help him, but they're a bit puzzled when they realize he's having trouble with the slime. Kurt is clearly panicking, so Sina tells him to relax, explaining that all he has to do is destroy the slime's core to defeat it. Kurt tries to do what she says, but when he attempts to stab the core, his knife won't pierce it at all, and somehow he ends up stabbing himself instead. It's obvious Kurt won't be able to handle it alone, so Sina steps in and finishes off the slime for him. Still, she's amazed by just how bad Kurt is at fighting. He did say his combat skills were basically non-existent, but she didn't expect them to be this poor. Kurt apologizes for being so useless, but the others reassure him that it's not a problem. His role as a porter is just to carry the loot from the quest, so he can leave all the combat to them. Kurt is almost in disbelief at what he's hearing. He just messed up horribly, yet no one is mad at him. It's a complete contrast to how he was treated back in Flaming Dragon Fang, and he feels grateful to have found such kind teammates. They finally reach the cave, but it's quite dark inside, so Sina decides to spread some glow moss around to lighten up the area. After the cave is illuminated, Kurt spots some poop on a rock and asks Sina whether he should be worried about them. Kans explains that the poop belongs to a goblin, and judging by how fresh they are, there's likely a goblin nest nearby in this cave. Kurt starts to panic a bit, thinking that if he can't even take down a slime, there's no way he could ever beat a goblin. But Kans reassures him that there's nothing to worry about. The rest of the team can easily deal with a few goblins. That said, if they happen to run into a full goblin horde, they'd be in serious trouble, so avoiding that scenario is absolutely crucial. With that in mind, they press on and head deeper into the cave. Eventually, they reach some ruins, and as they're walking, Kurt notices something odd about one of the walls. At that exact moment, Sina spots a goblin and quickly moves to take it out, but she's a little too late. The goblin had already alerted for backup, and now they can hear a massive horde of goblins approaching from both the front and the rear. The reports didn't mention that there would be so many goblins here, and now they have nowhere to run, so Sina turns to Danzo to ask if he has a plan. But with these odds, the only thing they can do is brace themselves for a brutal death. Kurt speaks up and tells everyone that he found a secret passage in the wall here, and that's wonderful news. But even with the passage, they won't be able to outrun the goblins, so they need a distraction. Danzo and Kans exchange a glance with Sina, and she immediately grasps what they need her to do, so she guides Kurt into the hidden chamber and shuts the door behind them. Confused, Kurt questions why she would do that when Danzo and Kans remain outside, but this was their plan all along. Kans explains through the door that if the entire group fled together, the goblins would surely pursue them all, so he and Danzo will act as decoys, drawing the creatures away to give Kurt and Sina a clear path to safety. Kurt doesn't want to leave them behind, but Sina tells him they can't go back. She doesn't want to leave her teammates behind either, but Kurt has zero combat ability and Sina's fighting skills are average at best, so they would only slow the two of them down. Besides, she says she is sure Danzo and Kans will find a way to survive this somehow. They were fully aware they wouldn't make it out alive. Even so, they had zero regrets about their choice, because sacrificing yourself to save your comrades is the highest honor a warrior could ever achieve. Meanwhile, Sina tells Kurt they have to keep moving. She scatters glow moss around to illuminate their surroundings and scan for a way out, only to freeze in terror as she realizes this isn't just some hidden chamber. It's a boss arena, and now, sealed inside with them, looms the hulking form of an iron dragon golem. Meanwhile, back in town, Liz wants to meet Kurt again, so she asked Ulycia to bring her to his inn. After Ulycia picks the lock, she and Liz enter Kurt's room, but to their surprise, he's not here. Suddenly, they hear someone's voice telling them that if they are looking for Kurt, he went on a mission in the northeastern caves. Ulycia has no idea who is speaking, so she rushes out of the room to confront this person. However, by the time she gets outside, Bandana is gone. She is confused by what just happened, but Kurt really is in the northeastern caves, and he might be in serious trouble. Based on what Ulycia knows, a goblin slaying training program was recently held near those caves, so it's possible that some of the surviving goblins ended up establishing a nest there. Ulycia tells Liz to stay put because she's heading out to help Kurt, but Liz insists on going with her. Ulycia doesn't think it's a wise move. Bringing a princess into a monster-infested cave isn't exactly the safest plan. However, Liz has been practicing her magic since childhood, so she's confident in her ability to defend herself. Plus, since Ulycia is technically assigned to guard her, it would actually be irresponsible to leave her behind alone. Ulycia eventually agrees to to take Lies with her, so the two of them head to the cave, and from the fresh glow moss on the walls, they can tell that someone was here recently. Lies casts a sense enhancement spell on herself, and Ulyssia thinks she's going to try listening for any signs of Kurt, but Lies gets on her hands and knees and starts sniffing around for Kurt. She had only been around him for a few minutes, but that was more than enough for her to memorize his scent. After sniffing around a bit more, she manages to catch Kurt's trail. At the same time, she hears the sounds of a battle coming from a hallway nearby, so she quickly alerts Ulyssia and gives her a stat boost to help her intervene. Danzo and Kans have been holding their own against the goblins for a while, but at the rate things are going, they won't be able to hold out much longer. Fortunately, just before either of them can be seriously hurt, Ulyssia rushes in and wipes out all the goblins in a single attack. Meanwhile, inside the secret room, Sina falls to her knees in defeat because there's no way she can fight a iron dragon golem. She apologizes to Kurt for dragging him into this mess because now both of them are going to die here. But Kurt tells her there's nothing to worry about because he has dealt with tons of these things before. He begins moving toward the dragon, and just as he's about to strike, he leaps into the air and lands right on its tail. With a swift tap of his dagger, Kurt slices the entire tail clean off. One by one, he does the same to each of the dragon's limbs, and Sina can barely believe what she's witnessing. This is the same guy who couldn't even defeat a slime, yet he's taking down a dragon like it's nothing. At this point, she's honestly a bit frightened, but Kurt doesn't get why. After all, mining golems is just a regular thing for him. Just then, Ulyssia rushes into the secret room to see if Kurt is okay, and she finds him standing in front of a pile of dragon golem parts. Kurt's glad to see her here and asks her to please save his friends because Danzo and Kans might still be in trouble. But Ulyssia tells him she already saved those two, and while they may be a little injured, they are going to be fine. With everyone now safe, they regroup in the room to talk things over. The first thing Kans and Danzo do is thank Ulyssia for saving their lives, admitting they wouldn't have made it without her. But Ulyssia tells them there's no need to worry about that. What really matters is that she has something to share with Kurt, so as he takes some of the dragon parts, she lets him know that she's planning to open a new 8-layer shop. She invites him to join her, but Kurt hesitates, unsure if he can commit since he's already part of their current party. Kans tell him not to worry about their group. Ulyssia's proposal is too good to pass up, so he urges Kurt to take the opportunity, since Kans and the rest are fine with it. Kurt finally accepts the offer. Ulyssia adds that she's looking to recruit a few adventurers to guard the 8-layer shop and asks if Kans and his group would be interested in the job, to which they happily agree. With such great news at hand, Kans suggests they celebrate by throwing a party once they return to town. Speaking of town, Ulyssia reminds Kurt that he should get his abilities appraised once they return to the agency. She's already arranged for someone to evaluate him. A few hours later, Kurt arrives at the agency and meets Mimiko, who introduces herself as a royal court mage. She explains that she's heard much about his remarkable abilities and is here specifically to assess his skills. After completing the appraisal, Mimiko informs Kurt that all his non-combat skills are B rank, but she was totally lying. The truth is, every single one of his abilities tested at S rank, and his mana reserve is greater than anything she's ever encountered. She's relieved she was the one conducting the evaluation because if word got out about Kurt's true power, it could spell catastrophe for the entire nation. The situation is so dire that they'd likely have to eliminate any witnesses immediately, and that spells trouble for Kershel, who just overheard everything. The following day, the group promptly sets off for the town where the 8-layer workshop is going to be established. However, Ulyssia never actually mentioned who the new 8-layer master would be, so Kans is feeling eager to meet this person. Ulyssia can't really reveal the truth either, so she begins coming up with excuses right on the spot. At this point, Sina has already realized that Ulyssia didn't bring their party along out of generosity, and since she started acting oddly when Kans brought up the 8-layer master, Sina is beginning to grow very suspicious. As they get closer to the town, Kurt suddenly realizes it's the same place where he once repaired the wall, and since he still believes the Margrave let him go because he wasn't a good worker, he feels uneasy about coming back. Eventually, Ulyssia brings the group to where the new 8-layer workshop is supposed to be, but calling it a workshop doesn't make much sense. What they're actually looking at is just an empty plot of land. Kans points out that they can't do anything with just a bare piece of land, and Ulyssia knows knows that perfectly well, so she tells them they'll be staying at an inn while Kurt finishes constructing the 8-layer workshop. She asks him if he can complete the task by the end of the day, but constructing an entire workshop in a single day is, even for Kurt, entirely impractical, though he could likely build it in 3 days. Ulysses assures him he can take as much time as needed, as she doesn't wish to hurry him, and if he requires additional materials for the workshop, he should not hesitate to ask her. Kurt, pleased by this, already has a list of items in mind, so he writes them down and requests that Ulysses procure them for him. The list includes things like amethyst, sapphire, and griffin feathers, which makes Sina question why Kurt would need such materials just to construct a workshop. However, Ulysses knows better than to doubt him, so she simply assures him she'll do her best to collect everything, though it'll take some time, meaning he'll have to wait about 2 days. And as it turns out, Kurt is completely okay with that. Sina still can't shake the nagging feeling that something is off, and Ulysses is beginning to notice her wariness. Though both pretend everything is fine for the moment, Ulysses instructs the group to proceed to the inn immediately to allow Kurt to work undisturbed. But before they depart, she reminds Kurt to ensure he takes breaks and eats well, making him promise to return to the inn by nightfall. Meanwhile, after the others arrive at the inn, Ulysses gathers them to share something significant. Up to this point, Kans and Danzo have believed Kurt to be an ordinary individual, but Ulysses knows she can't conceal the truth indefinitely, particularly since Sina has already witnessed some of Kurt's extraordinary abilities. Sina presses Ulysses to clarify who Kurt truly is, but first, Ulysses insists on formally introducing herself. She holds out the crest of the royal family and explains that she's an adventurer who once worked for them, and the girl sitting across from them is actually Lies, the 3rd princess of the kingdom. All 3 of them are stunned by this revelation, and Kans feels like he ought to stand up and greet her properly. But Lies tells him there's no need for that. She's currently keeping her identity a secret, so she asks them to keep treating her like any regular girl. Since Lies is the 3rd princess, Sina wonders if that means Kurt is royalty too, but Ulysses clarifies that he isn't part of the nobility. In reality, Ulysses still has no clue about Kurt's background, but what she does know is that all of his combat-related skills are G rank, while every other skill he has is triple S rank. The 3 of them are left speechless after hearing that, since triple S rank skills are almost considered mythical, but given Kurt's abilities, it actually adds up. Ulysses explains that Kurt's actual skill level is classified for now, so nobody is permitted to discuss it openly. Even Kurt himself doesn't know the truth. Ulysses and Mimiko deceived him, claiming he was merely B rank. However, in reality, Kurt is the one who will become the new 8-layer master, but Ulysses has no plans to reveal that to him anytime soon. Sina rises in a burst of anger and shouts at Ulysses, unable to comprehend why she would deceive Kurt in such a way. Ulysses responds that Kurt likely wouldn't believe her even if she revealed the truth. She attempts to defend her actions, claiming she's only trying to protect Kurt, because if his skills were to become known by the wrong people, they might take advantage of him. Yet, in Sina's perspective, it's Ulysses who's currently exploiting Kurt. Ulysses has no response to that, so she simply stays quiet. Meanwhile, Sina looks over to Kans, clearly wanting no part in this chaotic situation. After a short pause, Danzo asks for a bit more context, so Lies explains that just a few days ago, Kurt managed to lift a deadly curse that had been cast on her, and he did it using nothing more than a bowl of porridge. Right now, someone is targeting Lies' life, which is the real reason this entire 8-layer master setup was created in the first place. The goal is to draw the assassins out and uncover whoever is orchestrating everything. But once again, Kurt is completely unaware of any of this, while it might appear selfish to involve Kurt in their scheme without his knowledge. Both Lies and Ulysses genuinely care for him and would never wish any harm to come his way. Lies asks them if they would be willing to maintain this secret and collaborate with them to guarantee Kurt's protection. Danzo points out that as adventurers, they're under no obligation to follow a royal's commands, but since Kurt is their friend, they'll go to any lengths to keep him safe. Kan shares the same sentiment, and Lies is relieved to have them aligned with their plan. However, Sina thinks their devotion seems excessive considering they've only known Kurt for 2 days at this point. Ulysses gets where Sina is coming from, because even though she speaks about Kurt like they've known each other for ages, the reality is she only met him 6 days ago, and she's still struggling to wrap her head around everything everything she's seen him do in that short time. Sina says she needs to take a walk to clear her head before making any decisions, and while she's out, she ends up heading toward Kurt's work site, thinking that he deserves to know the truth about how powerful he really is. But to her complete surprise, in just the few hours since they left, Kurt has already managed to finish laying down the entire foundation for the workshop. She asks him if he actually did all of this on his own, and Kurt confirms that he did. He figures this level of work is normal, especially since Ulysses told him he's B rank, but there's no way any B rank worker could have accomplished something like this. Kurt's grasp of ranks is completely confused at this point, and it doesn't help that constructing a dozen houses in a single day was fairly typical for the folks in his village. So, from Kurt's viewpoint, he's working much slower than he should be. Sina still feels uneasy about Ulysses relying on Kurt to construct the workshop, so she decides to ask him whether he feels bothered by having so much work pushed onto him. But Kurt responds that he has no reason to feel upset, since he genuinely enjoys doing this kind of thing. When he was a member of the hero party, they constantly called him worthless and eventually cast him out. But in this place, people actually recognize how valuable he is, and for him, that's already more than he ever hoped for. Meanwhile, Danzo waits in the town square for a crucial meeting with an informant, who happens to be Bandana. Recall that Danzo's party only brought Kurt on because their porter fell ill. It turns out that the porter, Bibinak, was secretly a spy who infiltrated Danzo's party with the express purpose of sabotaging it from the inside. Apparently, he was recruited by a band of rival adventurers jealous of Danzo's party's success. She had already located Bibinak and handed over precise instructions on where to find him, leaving Danzo free to use that intel however he wants. Danzo then compensates her for the solid work, and that same night, he makes his way to a tavern. Sitting at one of the tables is a bald man, fuming, partly because the waitress gave him a look of pure disgust when he tried to touch her, and partly because his scheme to eliminate Danzo's party had ended in total failure. But Bibinak already has another scheme prepared. He's learned that Danzo's party is involved with an 8-layer workshop tied to the third princess, meaning targeting them now could be extremely profitable. Just then, Danzo speaks up, coldly asking if he's savoring his last drink. The moment Bibinak recognizes Danzo's voice, he panics and runs away in a desperate attempt to escape. Bibinak dashes through the alley, but he suddenly stumbles over a cleverly placed wire, crashing to the ground as Danzo approaches at a calm, steady pace. At first, Danzo had dismissed Bibinak's odd behavior when he called in sick for that mining job, but now it's obvious to him that it was all part of a setup. Bibinak tries to act clueless, pretending he doesn't know what Danzo is accusing him of, but it's far too late for that. Danzo unsheathes his sword and swings it toward Bibinak's neck, only to stop himself at the last moment and choose to spare his life. He would rather not get blood on his hands over this, so he warns Bibinak to stay away from him and his friends, otherwise, next time he won't be so merciful. Danzo then walks away, and from behind a corner, we see Bandana watching the whole thing. She is disappointed that Danzo didn't finish Bibinak off, because he will probably be a problem in the future, so now she has to finish him off personally. But before she can act, two mysterious figures in cloaks appear out of nowhere and begin dragging Bibinak away. Bandana immediately identifies them as operatives of the Phantom Squad, Mimiko's personal covert unit. She wonders about why a royal court mage would be involved in such affairs, when suddenly her messenger Crow arrives, delivering a crucial letter. It is from her superior, and it's telling her to avoid interfering too much, because this matter is under Marlefus jurisdiction. Again, Bandana is disappointed, but she does have clear orders to leave Marlefus operation alone, and since there's nothing left for her to do here, it's time for her to head back to Kurt's hometown. Speaking of Marlefus, her situation is dire, as she's been captured and is now trapped within a magic circle. Meanwhile, back in town, Danzo and Cans wake up the next morning and are utterly stunned by the workshop Kurt has built. Not only that, but he somehow found time to plant trees and hedges, and they wonder how on earth he made vegetation grow so quickly. But while the others are stunned, Liz is busy fantasizing about getting married to Kurt and living here with him for the rest of her life. Just then, Kurt comes out to greet everyone and invites them in. He gives them a little tour of the house, including the main entrance, the 2 basement floors, and the water purification system he created with magic gems. He even built bedrooms for everyone, along with a special one reserved reserved for the 8-Leer Master. But on that note, Ulysses still hasn't revealed who the 8-Leer Master is supposed to be. She's not ready to tell Kurt that he's actually the one meant to fill that role. So she comes up with an excuse about the Master being too busy right now, then quickly tries to shift the conversation by asking Kurt which room is his. But Kurt's self-esteem is so low that he doesn't think he deserves a room since all he is good for is doing chores. He was planning to just sleep in a broom closet, but everyone immediately refuses to let that happen. They tell Kurt to just use the room that he made for the 8-Leer Master, since no one is using it right now. But it takes a whole 2 hours for them to convince him to agree to it. On the other hand, Ulysses asks Kurt if he's able to put up a barrier around the house to keep curses away. But since Kurt has never attempted barrier magic before, he's not confident he could pull it off. Given that, Ulysses decides she'll have to rely on the barrier spells Mimiko had prepared earlier, and she ends up spending the entire night placing them around the house. The last seal needs to go directly in front of Liz's room, so Ulysses walks over to hang it up. But when Liz hears footsteps outside her door, she thinks Kurt is trying to sneak into her room, so she rushes out to welcome him with open arms. But when she sees Ulysses, she is really disappointed because she was looking forward to spending the night in bed with Kurt. Ulysses tells her to quit thinking about strange things and warns Liz not to exploit Kurt's naivety, because given how eager he is to be helpful, if she were to ask him to sleep with her, he'd probably go along with it. The following morning, Kurt is busy preparing breakfast for everyone when Liz walks out wearing nothing but an apron. Ulysses scolds her for trying to deprave Kurt, but Liz replies that it's fine since she is wearing clothes underneath. In any case, once the meal is ready, everyone gathers around the table, and they all end up loving the food Kurt cooked. Speaking of Kurt, Ulysses inquires why he isn't with them. Liz remembers Kurt mentioning he wanted to clean because someone had scrawled graffiti across the mansion's walls. Ulysses instantly suspects he was likely referring to the barrier spells she had placed. Ordinarily, erasing barrier spells with a mere rag should be impossible, but this is Kurt we're dealing with, so Ulysses hurries to intervene. Unfortunately, she arrives too late, as Kurt has already scrubbed away every single barrier spell. He still believes it was just ordinary graffiti, unaware of the curse assassination attempt on Liz, since Ulysses never informed him. Now that Liz is fully exposed to curses once more and Mimiko isn't around to create any new barrier spells, Ulysses finds herself at a loss for what to do next. Meanwhile, the bishop of the church summoned Marlefus, and upon meeting him, he immediately informs her that she is being excommunicated. Shocked, Marlefus demands to know the reason behind this decision. The bishop then clarifies that there is substantial evidence, along with numerous complaints, suggesting that the Flaming Dragon Party is violent and destructive. In fact, the bishop recently learned that Gulnova is now a wanted criminal. Because of this, the church no longer wishes to have any association with Marlefus. Marlefus attempts to appeal the decision, arguing that she hasn't personally done anything bad. Well, except from that one time she had to use her lightning magic in a royal capital restaurant, but that was purely in self-defense, since she wasn't happy with the food they served. Honestly, the waiter totally deserved to be electrocuted as a lesson. That excuse isn't enough. But then again, the bishop isn't exactly a saint either, so instead, he tells Marlefus that he's willing to overlook her minor sins, and might even grant her the rank of priest, if she agrees to do one thing for him. The moment Marlefus hears about the possibility of becoming a priest, her eyes light up with excitement. She's absolutely ready to do whatever the bishop demands. First, he pours a glass of wine and orders for her to drink, but then, things take a sharp turn from what she anticipated. Instead of some simple task, the bishop wants her to help assassinate the kingdom's third princess. Normally, Marlefus would never agree to something like this. However, the wine she just drank had a curse placed on it. Unless she agrees to assassinate the princess, she's doomed to die a painful death within a month. With no other choice left, she swears to assist the bishop with his scheme, and that scheme involves trapping Marlefus inside a magic circle with a demon lurking nearby. Meanwhile, things remain fairly normal over at Kurt's mansion. Right now, everyone is enjoying a delicious breakfast, and for some reason, Liz hasn't been hit with any new curses, even though Kurt removed all the curse protections. So far, Ulysses hasn't managed to figure out why that is. Still, since they have quick access to Kurt's magical cooking, it should be enough to counteract any curses that might target Liz. Either way, it seems she no longer has to be concerned about Liza's safety, especially now that Mimiko has finally made it to town. With Ophelia's assistance, they've established an information network designed to track down anyone who might try to hurt Liz. Liz observes that something feels unique about the cake Kurt baked today. Kurt then shares that he used rice flour in place of traditional flour. Liz adores the flavor, as it brings back memories of the rice porridge Kurt prepared for her when they first crossed paths. So, she inquires if Kurt would make it for her again should she ever fall under a curse. Kurt tells her he'd be happy to make as much rice porridge as she wants, but Liz shouldn't worry about being cursed again. Hearing this, Ulyssia is surprised, so she asks Kurt how he can be so certain, especially since he mentioned before that he couldn't create any anti-curse barriers. Kurt explains that he isn't able to set up any barriers inside the house, but that's simply because the entire mansion itself already serves as a curse barrier. This means any magic related to curses will automatically be reflected, though Kurt did make a few adjustments to it. As it happens, the assassins targeting Liz have just decided to cast another curse on her. The Magger initiates the ritual for his most powerful curse, yet, rather than functioning as planned, the curse dissipates, and the magician finds himself cursed to endure a constant flashbang to the face. Kurt established the barrier to achieve this, as he wished to avoid unintentionally killing someone with a reflected curse, even if they likely had it coming, and this proved to be a far superior choice. Ulyssia is amazed by Kurt's skill once again. She feels relieved knowing that Kurt is protecting Liz and keeping her safe. However, she really must hurry inside for Ophelia and Mimiko so they can begin their search for anyone emitting a glow. Since Ulyssia will be away for some time, Kurt approaches Liz and casually asks if she'd like to join him for some shopping. Liz is surprised that Kurt is essentially asking her out on a date, but he simply thought it would be pleasant to stroll through the city together, especially considering Liz hasn't even left the mansion yet. She appreciates the gesture, but given the current situation, she explains that she absolutely can't go outside. Meanwhile, up on the city walls, General Allraid and his right hand, Generic, are feeling uneasy because the fog outside the walls keeps getting thicker, and that can only mean one thing: a monster attack is on its way to the city. However, they likely don't need to be too concerned, since the walls have been completely restored and their army is prepared to fight at any time. At the same moment, Ulyssia, Mimiko, and Ophelia have just located the glowing mage, only to discover he was killed by his own allies, as bringing him along would have risked attracting too much notice. Even so, Ulyssia is startled to see that the glow curse Kurt created is still active despite the man being dead, and if he can produce something like this with such little preparation, Ophelia suggests they might as well come clean with Kurt and request his assistance. After all, with his help, tracking down the assassins would likely be far faster. However, Ulyssia insists she doesn't want to drag Kurt into this, even though, realistically, she's already pulled him in quite deeply. At that very moment, the sound of alarm bells echoes across the city as the monsters begin their assault. General Allraid immediately orders his soldiers to cast light spells, illuminating the battlefield so they can finally see the creatures they're fighting against. To his dismay, he spots an enormous horde of skeletons advancing toward the walls. His men have no chance of repelling such a vast number at once, so he commands a group of soldiers to remain with him to fend off the skeletons, even if it means sacrificing their lives. Meanwhile, the others must prioritize evacuating as many citizens as they can. Allraid was fully prepared to give his life for his people. Yet, to his astonishment, just as the skeletons approached the wall, they all began to vanish. Allraid is confused by what's happening. Then he recalls that this part of the wall was restored by Kurt, and he thinks that Kurt must have played a role in this. The whole skeleton army ultimately vanishes. We then shift back to Marlefus, still confined within a magic circle. The bishop had forged a pact with this formidable demon to assassinate the princess. The advanced demon is now forcibly draining Marlefus' magical energy as a power source to summon monsters. Since the initial wave has already been defeated, the demon intends to continue summoning skeletons until Marlefus' mana and life force are entirely depleted. In the city, Kurt has just learned of the monster assault and asks Ulyssia if they'll be alright. Ulyssia explains that monsters currently encircle the city on all fronts, and although the knights are working hard to devise a plan to counterattack, their options are limited in the current situation. The sole reason the city remains intact is that a significant portion of the skeleton skeletons were purified the moment they reached the walls. Kurt explains that he imbued the walls with enchantments during their repair, noting that such practices were commonplace in his village. He's taken aback that people here haven't been enchanting their walls. That said, Kurt only managed to enchant 2 of the city's 4 walls. If the skeletons target the unenchanted walls, they'll likely breach them quickly. Lies, thinking wisely, asks Kurt if he could create a weapon capable of eliminating all the skeletons. Kurt considers the idea. However, before he can respond, Ulysses interjects, stating she must step out for a while. Before departing, she reminds Kurt and Lies that they are strictly forbidden from leaving the mansion under any circumstances. Lies doesn't mind at all. In fact, she's pleased, since this gives her a chance to spend some time alone with Kurt. Meanwhile, Ulysses makes her way to the storage room and retrieves a box packed with magic crystals, all crafted by Kurt. Now armed with her hidden advantage, Ulysses, Ophelia, and Mimiko set off to find General Allraid and present their strategy to him. Allraid recognizes Ulysses. After all, the 2 of them are longtime friends, but he's taken aback to find her in his city. Ulysses explains her strategy to stop the skeleton horde. Since the undead appear to be emerging from some nearby ruins, she intends to infiltrate them and cut off their power source. But to pull this off, she needs Allraid and his soldiers to serve as a distraction, drawing the skeletons away so she can slip into the ruins undetected. Allraid expresses that the plan seems far too dangerous for him to approve. However, Ulysses reassures him of its success, particularly because she possesses a secret weapon. She reveals one of the magic crystals crafted by Kurt, explaining that it holds sufficient power to purify an entire dungeon. Thus, it should be more than capable of demolishing the ruins and stopping the skeleton horde. Since Ulysses is so determined, Allraid agrees to assist her, but only if she lets him accompany her on the mission. Ulysses acknowledges Allraid's strength and capability, yet she still questions whether he's truly certain about joining her, given the extreme danger ahead. However, Allraid stands firm, since protecting the city is his responsibility, and he won't retreat from that duty. Besides, in his absence, Vice General Generic can lead the troops, and while the soldiers divert the monsters' attention, Mimiko and Ophelia will remain behind to help defend the city from any additional threats. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Kurt has just completed his gardening tasks when he begins reflecting on Liza's earlier comment about crafting a weapon. He makes his way to the forge he constructed and starts working on a project. In his village, the blacksmiths could effortlessly forge remarkable weapons. Though Kurt still lacks confidence in his own abilities, he is determined to be helpful to his friends, so he commits to doing all he can to create a quality weapon. At the same time, Ulysses and Allraid are about to head out, but there's a horde of monsters blocking the exit, so she takes out one of the magic crystals and prepares to use it. She warns all the soldiers to close their eyes, and as soon as the crystal hits the monsters, a blinding flash of light wipes them all out. Ulysses was aware of the power of Kurt's crystals, but she never realized they could purify such a large number of monsters simultaneously. Regardless, this plays to their advantage, so the soldiers set out to confront the next surge of monsters, while Ulysses and Allraid make their way to the ruins. Back in the mansion, Kurt has just finished forging the blade, but after putting the finishing touches on it, his insecurities start getting to him. He was told that his blacksmithing skills were only B rank, so he doesn't believe a sword made by him could ever be good enough to fight monsters with. Not long after, Liz seeks out Kurt to ask what he'd like for dinner, but her attention is quickly drawn to the sword in his hands. She finds it beautiful. Kurt, noticing her admiration, offers it to her, saying she can keep it if she's that fond of it. However, he warns her to handle it with caution, as he's infused it with powerful magic. Liz thanks Kurt for the gift, but while Kurt may be oblivious when it comes to his own skills, he knows what a forced smile looks like. There's obviously something bothering Liz, and he would be lying if he said he hadn't noticed it before. So he asks Liz if someone is targeting her. She's amazed that Kurt has figured it out, but she acknowledges his accuracy and expresses regret for all the trouble she's caused. Kurt reassures her that an apology isn't necessary, yet Liz feels deep remorse, knowing that her actions keep everyone in danger. Indeed, at this very moment, Ulysses is out there, more, putting her life on the line for Liza's sake. Kurt might have deduced that someone is pursuing Liz, but he remains unaware that she's a princess, or that her protection is crucial for the kingdom. All he understands is that Ulyssia has gone to address an issue at the nearby ruins, and he recalls a time when Golnova covered those ruins with graffiti, so he assumes Ulyssia is confronting a criminal who's been stalking Liz. His assumption couldn't be more wrong, but one thing remains true. Ulyssia is risking everything to protect Liz. Meanwhile, Kurt is left utterly helpless, aware that his pathetic combat skills make him useless in a real fight. The frustration eats at him when all he wants is to keep the people he cares about safe. Liz shares the same feeling. As she dislikes that others endanger themselves for her, she'd far prefer to battle and defend herself if she were able. Since she mentioned it, Kurt proposes that they both head out to track down the culprit on their own. Liz agrees with the idea, but she questions how they'll manage to leave the city, given that it's entirely surrounded by monsters at the moment. Kurt reassures her, saying that he's already come up with a perfect plan for their escape. Meanwhile, far out on the battlefield, Ulyssia feels a chill in her chest, sensing that something terrible is going to happen to Kurt. At the mansion, Liz is preparing to go into battle when she suddenly remembers she hasn't tested the enchanted blade Kurt gave her. Wondering what kind of magic it produces, she raises it above her head, but to her shock, nothing happens. Just then, someone comes up behind her. As she turns around, Liz is startled by what she sees, making it obvious that the magical sword had indeed done something. Meanwhile, Ulyssia and Allraid continue fighting their way through the zombie horde. The diversion squad has almost wiped out the monsters here, but there are still plenty left, and Ulyssia has been using up her magic crystals at a rapid pace. She's nearly run out. Suddenly, Allraid is stabbed in the stomach by one of the creatures, and as Ulyssia rushes to his aid, she's quickly surrounded by more monsters. With no time to grab another crystal, she won't be able to save herself. Fortunately, Cans and the others arrive just in time to rescue her. After hearing about what was happening, they rushed back as quickly as possible the moment they finished their mission. They soon locate the source where all the monsters are coming from, and Ulyssia uses one of the magic crystals to clear out every monster in the vicinity, allowing them to reach the ruins entrance. Ulyssia gives Allraid some of Kurt's healing soup to help him recover from his injury, and once he's fully healed, she gets ready to move in. As more monsters begin emerging from the building, Cans and the others offer to take care of them so that Ulyssia and Allraid can proceed without any backup. Meanwhile, deep within the ruins, Marlefus remains trapped, and at this pace, it's only a matter of time before she dies. Not that the demon gives it a second thought. However, what does concern him is how well the humans are holding their own against his monsters, performing far better than he anticipated. Ulyssia and Allraid, in particular, have caught his attention. Having already fought their way inside the ruins, annoyed by their persistence, he decides to handle them himself. As Ulyssia and Allraid sprint through the corridors, they stumble upon the source of the zombie infestation. Without hesitation, she hurls one of Kurt's magic crystals into the heart of the spawning ground, eradicating not only the undead, but also the dark magic fueling their creation. Ulyssia is amazed at how smoothly that went, but her relief is short-lived. Within moments, the demon materializes before them. Now, instead of fleeing, they have no choice but to face it head-on. Ulyssia lunges forward and strikes the demon with one of the magic crystals, using it as a weapon. While the crystal's power definitely connects, it has no effect, as the demon claims to have infinite health. Allraid refuses to believe that and attempts to slash the demon across the stomach, but it doesn't work either. The wound heals almost instantly, not because the demon actually has infinite health, but because he's using Marlefus mana to regenerate, which is rapidly depleting her energy. The demon informs Allraid and Ulyssia that they're quite skilled compared to most humans it has encountered, but in the end, they're no match for its power. The same applies to all their friends battling outside, desperately striving to defend the city, but ultimately destined to perish at the hands of a zombie legion. Allraid declares that none of his men would ever be defeated by some lowly monster, but the demon responds that he can simply keep summoning more until they're eventually overwhelmed. Even the three fighting outside the ruins wouldn't survive the next wave he plans to unleash, but Ulyssia and Allraid are determined not to let that happen. The two launch a simultaneous attack. Ulyssia slices off the demon's head, while Allraid drives his blade into its heart. Yet the demon picks up his head and continues speaking as if nothing happened. He declares that he's going to slaughter all the nights and then hunt down the princess. But for amusement, he might let Ulyssia and Allraid live long enough to watch Lies suffer a slow death. Ulyssia refuses to let that happen, but she finds herself at a loss, unsure of what to do next since none of her attacks are effective. Not even Kurt's magic crystals were enough to finish the demon off. Meanwhile, Marlefis has come to terms with her fate, having lost so much strength that even if she were freed from the magic circle, she wouldn't have the energy to escape. On top of that, due to the curse the bishop placed on her, she hasn't eaten in days and is now experiencing the worst hunger she's ever known. She finds herself wishing she could taste Kurt's cooking just once more before dying, and when she starts hearing Kurt's voice, she assumes it's nothing more than her imagination. But suddenly, Kurt emerges from a hole. He and Lies have just made their way into the chamber. Marlefis is amazed to see Kurt here, and even more shocked that he's accompanied by the princess. She assumes Kurt must have uncovered her role in the scheme to assassinate Lies, bringing the princess along to confront her. However, the truth is that Kurt had no idea Marlefis was even there until the moment he arrived. Kurt questions Marlefis, demanding if she's the one behind the attacks on Lies. But Marlefis clarifies that she was cast out by the church and manipulated into this situation by Bishop Tristan. Both Kurt and Lies hear her words, yet they interpret them in entirely different ways. Lies deduces that Tristan must be the mastermind orchestrating all the assassination attempts against her, while Kurt assumes Marlefis has been venting her frustration over her excommunication by scrawling graffiti everywhere. Marlefis doesn't understand what Kurt is talking about, and neither does Lies, but she still backs up everything Kurt says, even if it doesn't make any sense. Kurt then asks Marlefis whether she knows where Ulyssia is, but Marlefis has never heard of anyone by that name. However, she does recall spotting two adventurers heading in this direction, so they're probably on the floor just above this one. Kurt thanks her for the directions and gets ready to leave in search of Ulyssia, not giving Marlefis a second thought since he assumes the magic circle is nothing more than random graffiti. But Lies then asks him to help clean up the magic circle while she goes to look for Ulyssia herself. Kurt tries to stop her, worried it's too risky for her to head out alone, but she quickly reminds him that he gave her a magic sword, so she'll be perfectly fine on her own. Kurt finally agrees to let her leave, and during Liza's absence, he somehow locates a bucket and mop, preparing to begin cleaning. Marlefis considers him mad, as it's unthinkable to erase a magic circle with ordinary mop water, but Kurt's too stubborn to grasp the concept of impossible, so he nonchalantly sweeps the magic circle away. The moment the magic circle shatters, the demon senses his mana source has been disconnected. Now unable to sustain further damage, he swiftly evades Ulyssia and Allraid strikes, though neither of them understands the exact reason. The demon's sudden dodging makes one thing clear: he's afraid of taking hits now. Ulyssia grabs the final magic crystal from her bag, ready to finish off the demon once and for all, but before she can activate it, the demon smacks it from her grip. Now, without that crucial crystal, their odds of victory look dangerously low. Just as the demon prepares to unleash its full strength, Lies suddenly appears, shouting Ulyssia's name. Lies has been the demon's main target from the very start, so the moment it sees her, it stabs her to death and laughs at how foolish she was to come here all alone. But to its shock, Liza's body suddenly dissolves into a swarm of butterflies, revealing that it was only a clone. The demon is in disbelief, certain it had struck down the real Lies, but it turns out that what it stabbed was merely an illusion summoned by the sword. Just as its name suggests, the sword creates illusions capable of fooling anyone, sometimes showing a chaotic mess of nonsense, and in this case, a flawless replica of Lies. The demon keeps trying to kill Lies again and again, but each time it lands a blow, it ends up being another illusion. Meanwhile, while the demon is distracted by all the fakes, the real Lies successfully slips past and reaches the magic crystal that Ulyssia had dropped. She then smashes it, and the resulting burst of energy wipes the demon out. And since the demon was the one who summoned all the zombies, now that he's gone, all the monsters vanish as well. The crisis is finally over, and everyone in the city can rest easy knowing that they are safe. Ulyssia is furious with Lies for risking herself like that. Lies says sorry for arriving without permission, but she couldn't just keep hiding while others were risking their lives to protect her. Even though Ulyssia is still upset, she knows she doesn't have the right to stay angry. After all, if Lies hadn't appeared, the demon would have ended both her and Allraid. Allraid wants to personally thank Lies for saving him, but she tells him him it's not necessary because he fought even harder than she did. She thanks him for all his hard work in defending the city and promises to give him a reward for his brave actions. Meanwhile, Kurt has just managed to erase the last remnants of the magic circle, but even with it gone, Marlefist's curse still stops her from eating anything, meaning she'll eventually starve. Right then, Kurt hands her some rice balls. Sensing her hunger, Marlefist is grateful for the kindness, but if she tries to eat them, the curse will just make her throw it all back up. Nevertheless, she chooses to eat it anyway, wanting to enjoy the flavor of Kurt's cooking one final time before her death. Yet, as she takes a bite, she discovers she can eat it without issue, and moments later, the curse afflicting her stomach vanishes. It's not hard to deduce that Kurt's food is what healed her, but this marks the first moment Marlefist truly grasps the extent of Kurt's exceptional abilities. Now, she looks back on everything Kurt did for her and the rest of Flaming Dragon, and it finally hits her. Their party was only strong because Kurt was the one holding them together, so she genuinely apologizes for how she treated him. Marlefist is still awful, but at least she recognizes Kurt's strength now, and that's gotta mean something, though it doesn't stop her from being arrested, since two of Mimiko's agents arrive to take Marlefist into custody for her involvement in the assassination attempt. Marlefist calls out to Kurt for help, but he simply promises to visit her in jail as often as she likes. Once Marlefist is taken away, Lies approaches Kurt to check if he's okay. Kurt says he's doing great, and if anything, he's more concerned about Ulyssia and the others who were fighting, but Lies reassures him they're all right thanks to the medicinal soup he prepared for them. After everyone makes it back from the battlefield, Kurt welcomes them to a grand feast at the mansion. However, once they all settle down to eat, the soldiers remain quiet, silently devouring their food. Kurt is concerned that the soldiers are only eating out of courtesy, as they don't appear to be enjoying themselves in the slightest, but Allraid tells him he's completely mistaken. The reason everyone is so quiet is because the food is the most delicious thing they've ever had, and they're too busy trying to eat as much of it as they possibly can. Kurt feels happy knowing that they're enjoying his cooking, and while the others continue devouring their meals, Lies calls Allraid over so she can introduce him to Kurt. Kurt remembers him as the foreman who oversaw the city wall repairs, but Lies quickly explains that Allraid's responsibilities go far beyond construction. He's actually the one governing the entire city and its citizens. Suddenly, a burst of fireworks lights up the sky, leaving the whole crowd in awe of the breathtaking display. Kurt mentions he figured some entertainment would pair nicely with the meal, which is why he set up these fireworks ahead of time. As for the meal itself, Allraid points out how all his wounds mysteriously healed after eating, but Kurt doesn't see why that's surprising. Back in his village, it was completely normal for someone to recover just by having a tasty meal, and they can't believe what they just heard. In a flashback to Kurt's younger years, when he lived in his hometown known as Haste Village, he walks up to Hildegard, who is occupied with her own affairs. Kurt inquires if she happens to be the daughter of the traveling merchant. At first, Hildegard pays no attention to Kurt, but as he persists, doing his utmost to get her attention, she eventually responds, explaining that her father has prohibited her from speaking to anyone from this village. It seems Hildegard's father believes the villagers here are strange, and if Hildegard spends time with them, she might pick up some of their oddness. Either way, Hildegard firmly tells Kurt that she's only talking to herself, and Kurt, going along with it, responds that he's also just talking to himself. That's how they introduce themselves, and before long, the two of them strike up a friendship. Soon after, Kurt takes Hildegard on a trip to the mountains riding his iron golem, aiming to show her some rainbow-colored flowers. Along the way, Hildegard spots some berries that look delicious, and she decides to eat some, only to discover that they're extremely poisonous. Luckily to her, even at such a young age, Kurt knows how to create an antidote. Acting fast, he gathers the rainbow-colored flowers, grinds them into a paste, mixes it with water, and places the mixture in his own mouth. But just before he can give the antidote to Hildegard, Kurt wakes up. He recalls that this incident took place 10 years ago. Now, he and his adventurer group are traveling to a village that has requested their assistance. Upon arrival, the village chief explains their issue. An unexpected drought has completely dried up their river. With no water, their crops are withering away. However, Ulyssia remains unconcerned. Looking closer at the map's details, she spots a huge reservoir in a neighboring village and notes that its waterways are linked to this village. However, as the village chief explains, explains, the real issue lies with the neighboring village leader, who refuses to share the water, despite multiple attempts at negotiation. That's precisely why the chief has turned to the Atelier for help, trusting in their influence and reputation to persuade the stubborn village head to cooperate and release the much-needed water. Once Ulysses hears the village chief's explanation, she heads back to where her group was stationed, only to find Danzo waiting there. He tells her that the others have already gone up the hill. Apparently, the elderly bird keeper has hurt his back, and they've asked Kurt to assist him. Ulysses figures they can manage that situation just fine, so without delay, she mounts her horse and sets off for the neighboring village, determined to negotiate for the water they desperately need. But upon her arrival, a woman drops to her knees and pleads with Ulysses to assist their village with the water supply too. Ulysses is confused by the situation and realizes that, at this point, all she can do is hope for rain. Right then, two villagers rush over in a panic and try to inform Ulysses about something occurring at the top of the hill. Though they struggle to put what they witnessed into words, Ulysses hurries to the spot and finds Cans and Sina gazing in awe at a massive lake. She's puzzled. If a lake this size existed here, why would the villagers report a water shortage? Sina can't really describe what just happened, so she simply tells Ulysses that this lake wasn't here mere moments ago. As Kurt comes running toward them, Ulysses begins to piece together what likely happened. She questions Kurt about why he's here, since Danzo had told her he was supposed to be looking after the birds. Kurt then explains that he noticed the old man's birds were desperately parched, so he rushed here and drew water up from an underground aquifer. Not long after, both village leaders arrive, expressing their gratitude to Ulysses for rescuing them from disaster. Kurt, too, look at her in admiration, convinced she miraculously fixed everything within minutes, completely oblivious to the fact that he was the one who accidentally ended the crisis. With the mission complete, the group is now heading back, having been given several eggs as a token of gratitude. Kurt mentions that he's planning to use the eggs to cook something tasty later on. He then asks about Lies, and Ulysses explains that Lies went to meet with the Lord of Tikhon to deliver a report regarding the monster attack from the other day. Later that day, Lies and Allraid are engaged in a conversation with Mangrave Tikhon. It seems that the Mangrave holds a rank comparable to that of a duke, and in an effort to strengthen his power, he's attempting to gain Lies's favor. Although Lies sees right through the Mangrave's intentions, she maintains a pleasant smile, reminding herself that she's here as the representative of the Atelier Master, not as the kingdom's princess. The Mangrave attempts to gather information about the Atelier Meister, aware that he was the one responsible for saving the town from the undead monster assault. However, Lies skillfully avoids his question, determined to keep Kurt from being dragged into political games. As their discussion continues, the Mangrave changes the subject to the town where the Atelier Master resides, noting that the place still hasn't been given a name. Lies explains that in order for a town to receive an official name, the kingdom must first assign a viceroy. Since the Mangrave holds the power to appoint viceroys within his territory, he subtly hints at his plan to name the Atelier Meister as the viceroy of the town. Lies instantly sees through his true motive, to bring Kurt under his personal authority. However, since Kurt isn't even aware yet that he's the Atelier Meister, Lies can't let this happen. Because of that, she explains to the Mangrave that a decision this significant can't be made by her alone. The Mangrave find this suspicious, especially considering she's not just the princess, but also the Atelier's official representative. He remarks that he had assumed she would have at least some level of authority in matters like this. Lies is completely taken by surprise. She doesn't know how to respond and grows even more uneasy when the Mangrave shifts his attention to Allraid. The Mangrave then asks Allraid, who serves as the general of the town's knights, whether he has any objections to appointing the Atelier Meister as the viceroy. Lies can only hope he refuses, which would also confirm that Allraid is unaware of Kurt's true circumstances. So Allraid ends up agreeing to the proposal. Lies quickly steps in once more with another objection. This causes the Mangrave to ask if there's some kind of hidden flaw or defect that would make the Atelier Meister unsuitable for the position. The remark deeply offends Lies, and unable to restrain herself, she declares that no one in the entire nation is more gifted than the Atelier Meister. She ends up praising Kurt a little too much, which gives the Mangrave exactly the confirmation he was looking for. He confidently announces that the Atelier Meister will, without a doubt, be appointed as the viceroy. Later that day, Lies comes back to the mansion with the news. Ulysses is worried that they might be forced to present Kurt to everyone as the 8-layer master, which would be a problem since he himself doesn't even know he is the 8-layer master. She proposes finding someone else to pose as the 8-layer master just to settle the matter quickly. But that wouldn't work either, because all the knights have already met Kurt and know who he really is. So who would believe them if they brought in a replacement who's clearly not as skilled or powerful as he is? At first, Lies agrees to Ulysses' suggestion, but upon realizing it involves selecting someone else to impersonate Kurt, he shouts that it's unacceptable. No one else in that world could ever be like Kurt. She demands to know Kurt's whereabouts, and Ulysses explains that Kurt is currently busy with child rearing. The moment Lies hears this, she freaks out. If the child isn't hers, she declares she'll adopt it and raise it alongside her beloved Kurt. Ulysses is only joking with her. Kurt doesn't actually have a child, but he is caring for the egg they received as a gift from the village they visited, with the egg about to hatch at any moment, and knowing how Kurt always manages to surprise them, Ulysses can't help but wonder just what kind of creature will emerge from this egg in the end. Right at that moment, Kurt shouts for Ulysses, announcing that the egg has just hatched. Meanwhile, Mimiko is fed up with handling the numerous reports piled on her desk. She grumbles about it to Ophelia, who remarks that Mimiko's mask seems on the verge of slipping off. Discussing the workload on her desk, Ophelia informs her that Bishop Tristan has been murdered and his body was discovered. She proposes that the Poland church had him killed, needing someone to blame for the botched attempt at summoning the demon lord. Then, turning to Mimiko, Ophelia asks what she intends to do about Marlefus, whether she wants to kill her. As much as Mimiko might desire revenge, she remembers Kurt's words that he had promised to visit Marlefus in prison. With that in mind, killing her now might not be a good idea. At that moment, Mimiko receives a letter. It looks like she's just gotten some bad news. Meanwhile, back with Kurt, the egg has hatched into a little girl. Both Ulysses and Lies are confused that the egg's hatchling has somehow become Kurt's daughter. Not long after, Ulysses gathers everyone for a meeting, and the girl is sitting on Kurt's lap, calling him Papa. Even though she just hatched, she appears to be around 3 years old. Ulysses points out to Kurt that it's impossible for a child to come from an egg and warns him that the child might actually be a monster. Unfortunately, Ulysses needs Kurt to hand the child over, but he asks what she plans to do with her. She replies that Ulysses is going to dispose of the girl. Kurt refuses to let her go. He doesn't believe that such an innocent child could ever harm anyone. As Ulysses tries to pull the girl away from him, Kurt pleads, saying he'll take full responsibility for raising the baby, but Ulysses won't allow it. Then, in that very moment, the little girl looks at her, reaches out, and touches her face, calling her mama. Ulysses instantly frees, already picturing a future with Kurt and the little girl as their first child. As if sensing what Ulysses was thinking, Lies snaps her back to reality, clarifying that the little girl isn't her and Kurt's child. Ulysses quickly denies even considering that. But before she can say more, Lies takes the child from her arms. The moment the girl is in Liza's hands, she reaches up, grabs Liza's face, and calls her mama as well. Liza's heart softens in an instant. Cans tell Ulysses that there's no need to hurt the girl. He believes they can raise her properly. Even if she turns out to be a monster, they can help her grow into someone good. With few objections left, Ulysses reluctantly agrees. Lies starts thinking about what they should name the girl. Since the girl called her mama, she suggests they use a combination of her and Kurt's names, and decides on the name Curais. But Ulysses isn't having it. After all, the girl called her mama first, so she proposes the name Euculi instead. The two start arguing so loudly that they end up waking the girl. Confused, the girl asks why they're fighting. She then gently grabs both their hands, and suddenly everything calms down. In the end, they all agree that it doesn't matter whose name comes first or last in the girl's name anymore. Watching how the girl brings joy to the group and how everyone lights up around her, Kurt comes to realize that she might be the one who brings them all together, so he proposes the name Akiri, which means area. The name is warmly received by the others, and the little girl beams with happiness upon hearing her new name. That night, as Ulysses and Akiri fall asleep, one of Mimiko's subordinates arrives. In that moment, Ulysses hands him a sample of Akiri's hair and saliva, hoping it will reveal insights into Akiri's true nature. The next day, Kurt builds a room in the house specifically for Akiri. While Akiri is thrilled, Ulysses doesn't see it as a room at all. She sees it as a prison. Kurt designed it with with no windows and the walls are reinforced with mithril plates, making it impossible to open from the inside. On top of that, Ulysses has made sure that Lies and Akiri won't come into contact, at least not until she receives Mimiko's report on the samples taken from Akiri. Ulysses has some matters to handle with Kurt, so she informs him that they need to head out. Akiri wants to join them, but they tell her she can't come along. Ulysses then asks Sina to look after Akiri while they're away. As they make their way out, Ulysses tells Kurt that they should finish things quickly so they can hurry back and spend time playing with Akiri. Suddenly, Ulysses hears Akiri's voice coming from inside the carriage. She asks Kurt if he heard it too, and when he says he did, they both rush over to check. To their shock, they find Akiri inside. They wonder if she secretly slipped away and followed them, but they can't bring her along on their journey, since everyone back home must be worried about her. The problem is, they don't have enough time to take her back themselves. Fortunately, Ulysses spots one of Mimiko's subordinates riding by on horseback. She tells Kurt to stay put while she goes to ask for assistance. As she steps away, Kurt reflects on what might be troubling her. He realizes that Ulysses didn't say no to Akiri because she dislikes her, but because she's worried about their safety. Kurt begins to question whether he made the right choice, and wonders what he'll do if Akiri really does turn out to be a monster. Ulysses returns and snaps him out of his thoughts. She already knows what's on his mind, and she admits that he's not wrong, but at the same time, no one truly knows what Akiri might become someday, so neither of them is really mistaken. At that moment, an old man suddenly appears, urgently asking them to help save his village from the demon lord. Watch this next video on screen and subscribe to not miss next part.